Hello, everybody. Welcome back. This is Brian and Mr. Betcher for Breaking Down Security.
Hey, what's up, people?
Yeah, party people. So, our green room, we're decorated for Christmas anyway. And, when we were trimming the tree, somebody managed to fall out of that. And we decided to bring him on today. His name is Tyler Hudak. Welcome to Breaking Down Security, Mr. Hudak.
Oh, thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah, so why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? What's your day job? What's your night job? What do you do when you're trying to be Batman? Or maybe tell us a little bit about how you got here today.
Sure. So, I'm a security consultant. I do a lot of pen testing. That's my job. That's our bread and butter. But I also do incident response, computer forensics, malware analysis. Um, which I try to focus on. I've also taught a couple courses on an introduction to malware analysis at DerbyCon and then a couple other conferences around the country. Um, I guess I've been in security for about 16 years now. Started way back right when firewalls were a brand new thing, so it's seen a lot, and just trying to focus on keeping all the bad guys out for all of our clients.
Well, that is important. So you're doing malware, forensics, incident response. Do you find yourself doing reverse engineering of that malware?
Oh yeah, absolutely, all the time. So even when I'm not contracted out by a client to start looking at a piece of malware, I'm on a number of mailing lists and uh, places in the malware analysis community where everybody's sharing samples and that. So you're always getting the latest cool thing to look at and opening it up in something like IDA Pro and throwing it in the sandbox to see what it's doing and all the cool stuff that malware does, so we can try to get ahead of it and figure out who's behind it and all that fun stuff.
Okay.
So, in the last, well, you've been doing this for quite a while. In the last 3 years, have you seen any malware that's kind of like just you said, "Wow, that's new, that's different, that's exciting," or is it all the same?
No, no. I mean, there's definitely been an evolution of malware. I mean, even looking back the last my entire career, because I remember the first piece of malware that I ever had to deal with was the "I love you" virus, and that just took everybody by surprise. With and it's funny because I was trying to explain to my daughter what that was the other day, and I'm explaining to her that this is an attachment, that it was a program that it would send out emails that said, hey, I can't even remember what the message said. It was something along the lines of, hey, I love you, and here's something to show that, or something stupid like that. But people were falling for it, and it was just overwhelming mail servers. You look at that, and then you look at what's going on today. It's just unbelievable how far things have progressed, in the malware side. Um, the cool things that I've seen, I think the one that really jumps to my mind in the last couple of years is ransomware,
Mm-hmm.
with CryptoWall and CryptoLocker, and uh, the guys behind that have. I mean, I hate to say it, but they finally figured out how to do it right, to the point where I know people who were formerly in security, my friends, who are doing other tech jobs, who get hit by this stuff, and they're these are really smart guys who know how to protect themselves, but they somehow get infected by this. They lose their files, and they seriously considered paying these guys money to get their files back. I think when you can do that, and to security professionals or people who used to be security professionals, you definitely have something. You're doing something right. I mean, obviously, you're doing it right for the bad reasons, but I think that's something I've been impressed with, recently, with how well that's been working for them. I should probably say too that I'm part of a couple of groups working to take them down. So,
Yeah.
I'm not throwing out accolades to the bad guys saying, great job, keep going. It's more like you're doing a good job, but we're coming after you.
So you said you're working to defeat them? Are you using? Last week we posted a podcast about active defense. Are you using those kinds of techniques to fight those kinds of battles?
No, I mean I haven't been doing that, and I'll be honest, I don't know anybody who has any, or at least they've never admitted to me that they have. I know that there have been a couple talks through the last couple years at Black Hat and DEF CON and a couple other conferences talking about finding vulnerabilities and backdoors, and then exploiting those vulnerabilities, either in theory or actually in practice to take down the bad guys. I haven't seen anybody actually do that, at least for the stuff that I've looked at.
Okay. So I did some research. I do research to find out things about our interviews, and one of the things I found was a 5-part interview from 2008 about at an OWASP talk you gave, and one of the things you'd mentioned in there, and it's interesting how 6 years have happened. You mentioned in that talk that most malware nowadays doesn't run in a VM. The minute it detects it's in a VM, it will stop working or it will change the way it works. Do you see that nowadays with malware where it, are there still malware out there that cares if it runs in a VM or not?
Oh yeah, there's still definitely malware out there that which checks to see if it's running in VirtualBox or VMware, and then modifies what it does or just kills itself totally. But I think we started to see a shift from moving away from that, where they don't necessarily detect if they're running in a virtual machine because so many organizations have spread out to virtualization that if you just kill yourself if you find that you're in VMware, you're probably missing out on a number of targets. Instead, what I've seen malware do is kind of move towards more detecting analysis tools or debugging tools, and then if they see those common analysis tools or being run in a debugger, then that's when they do something that they kill themselves or whatever, because then they know that they're being analyzed.
Okay, so obviously it's an arms race where you find malware, it says, oh, I see IDA on here, I'm not going to run, or I'm going to run differently, or I'm going to change the way I work. So you guys have to create alternate methods so that they don't detect the fact that you're using those tools?
Correct. And there are a number of ways that you can do that. And it all depends on what you're doing. I mean, when you look at malware analysis, there's two different phases that you typically go through. There's a static analysis where you're just looking at the characteristics of the malware, and then there's dynamic analysis where you actually run it and look at its behavior. If you focus on the static analysis where you're pulling out things like embedded strings, you're looking at the metadata within the files, you're opening it up in a disassembler like IDAPRO, the malware is technically never running, so it really can't prevent you from looking at what's in there, assuming that you can get around any packers or any protections that it has in place. When you get into the behavioral analysis, the dynamic analysis, that's when you sometimes have to try to change your techniques in order to see if you can get around any detections that are in place. And I'll be honest with you, sometimes it's as simple as just renaming your tools. So, one of the more common tools is Process Monitor from sysinternals from Microsoft. That runs as procmon.exe. Some malware just look at the process list to see if procmon.exe is running. All you have to do is change that to notepad.exe or whatever you want, and it'll run fine.
Oh, that's hilarious.
Others, they're a bit more complicated. They actually, start looking at handles and some of the Microsoft internals of what things that are running on the system, which are harder for you to change. And so you kind of have to, I think, sometimes become a little bit creative with how you do that.
Okay. So is analyzing malware strictly a manual process? I mean, it sounds like you're doing a lot of debugging and forensics and stuff that would require a lot of manual processing. Are there any tools out there that you use having to do with GUIs? I know IDA is a GUI based one, but is the analyzing all done manually, or can you do it with an automated process?
You can definitely do it with an automated process, and it's funny you bring that up. because I wrote I don't know if you plan this or not, but I actually wrote a automation framework for static analysis, the static analysis side of malware
Really?
analysis called MASTIFF.
MASTIFF.
Um,
Okay.
and what it does is it will you give it a file. It determines what file you're dealing with, whether it's an executable or a PDF or a Windows document, and then it only applies the analysis techniques to extract that data for that file type.
Okay.
Some techniques are universal, like pulling out embedded strings you can do on any file, but some techniques are also specific to a file type. So, for example, you're not going to do a PE header analysis on a PDF. You're only going to do those on Windows executables. So there's no need to spend the cycles to run it on a PDF. And so Mastiff will determine that all for you and pull out that information. Now it doesn't analyze anything for you. You're still kind of left up to do the analysis on your own, but it at least pulls that information out for you. Um, that's what I use for static analysis because I wrote it, so I'm a little bit partial to it.
Sure.
For on the dynamic analysis side, there's really a number of different ways you can go to automate it. Probably one of the best home-built solutions that you could do is the Cuckoo Sandbox. That it was a HoneyNet project, summer or Google Summer of Code or whatever it's called, project that came out a couple years ago, and it's just kind of blossomed since then.
Okay.
It allows you to create your own sandbox, and it automates everything for you, runs the malware, pulls everything out, and gives you the results in this nice little HTML format. Or there's obviously online sandboxes that you can upload things to, such as like Threat Expert, Anubis, a couple others, where you can just upload the malware, and they have their own sandboxes doing whatever techniques that they do to analyze it, and they give you back the behavior that the malware did.
Now, okay, so those services are similar to a virus total kind of thing?
Yeah, exactly.
So, okay, so in that same vein, would that not be something you wouldn't necessarily want to do? Because if the malware writers were able to monitor those services, they would know that their malware has now been found out?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And when I teach my class, that's the one thing that I say is there are all these great public services out there, but you need to understand the risks of sending something to it.
Mm-hmm.
So VirusTotal is a great example. You're right. The bad guys are watching VirusTotal to see if their malware shows up on there,
Sure.
because if their malware shows up, then they know that they've been caught.
Yeah.
Plus, as an analyst, or as a person at an organization who's doing information security, who's doing incident response, um, the stuff you're dealing with could be targeted only against you. So you don't really want to be sharing that out with the world that you were attacked.
Yeah.
So uploading it to public services like VirusTotal or Threat Expert may not be in your best interest.
Okay.
So would I be able to tell the difference between a skitty and a sophisticated and targeted attack on my company, like you mentioned?
Yeah, there are definitely ways that you can tell that. In my experience, the things that I've seen that really give it off that as being targeted is if you start seeing things like your domain name within the actual malware itself, or if you see one or two emails come to specific people, a mass. So when you look at like phishing campaigns, you can kind of break them down into two types. One are like the mass phishing campaigns that everybody gets. So these are like the emails that say that they're from UPS, that you have a package to pick up, or you're you have a court appointment or something like that, and here's the attachment with the malware in it. That gets sent to everybody. I get like 4 or 5 of those a day in like multiple email accounts. That's kind of one end. The other end is the targeted phishing attacks, which will only come in to 1 or 2 people in your organization. The guys behind these are just targeting your specific organization, and so they're going to be using things like custom backdoors or backdoors which are harder to detect. They're going to send it to maybe 1 or maybe 2 people a week, a month, and they just act very patient, just waiting to see if those work. If it does, great. If not, next week or next month they'll try again.
So your malware that you're looking at, is it specifically stuff to infect people, or do you look at malware with botnets like say Zeus, or um, is it a combination of both, or you mentioned incident response. Do you get something saying, okay, we've been infected, but it doesn't look like it has to do with any kind of existing botnet? Do you ever see a lot of that custom stuff?
I do, not as often. The the custom stuff tends to get filtered to some of the bigger organizations, I think, because the company I work for, uh, we're not the first people that tend to get thought of for incident response, and so places like Mandiant are the ones who get called, and they tend to see the custom stuff more than we do. But
Okay.
we do get I do see some of that. I have seen it in the past. But it's really just a mix. You'll get a new variant that you'll be called in to look at all the time, and it could be something that's based off of Zeus because the Zeus source code was leaked a year or two ago,
Mm-hmm.
and so once that was leaked, there were hundreds of variants that came out, and I believe we actually started to see the some groups that were traditionally targeting specific companies start to take that Zeus source code and modify it for themselves. So, even if you get called in to look at something and it looks like it's something more common like Zeus or one of the more common malware, it's all about who's behind it. It doesn't necessarily mean that this was something. Sorry. It's all about who's behind it. It doesn't necessarily, mean that just because you're looking at a Zeus malware that it's just a botnet with 100,000 people in it. It could still be, that targeted attack against that organization.
Okay. So before we get too far, a couple of minutes ago you mentioned something about PE headers. Could you maybe explain what that is for people like myself who don't do malware analysis?
Sure. So PE headers are essentially the headers that are in front of any Microsoft executable. It's the standard format which tells the operating system where it can find certain components within the executable, so that when you double click on an executable and you want it to run, the operating system knows, all right, these are the DLLs I need to load, this is where the code starts, this is where the data is located, and so on.
Okay.
That contains a lot of useful data that you can look at as an analyst to figure out things such as the capabilities of the malware, when it was created, uh, potentially the compiler that was used, which can help you when you open it up in a disassembler like IDA Pro,
Mm-hmm.
and every file type or every file format or every file type that you look at is going to have its own unique header or at least unique format that you can take advantage of. So the same can be said for like PDFs. PDFs have their own specific format. There's metadata in there. There's information as to when it was created, potentially who created it. PDFs are typically going to be the delivery mechanism for an exploit, and so if you understand the format of a PDF, you can narrow down where that exploit is and pull that out, so you don't have to do a lot of analysis. You can just analyze the exploit itself and figure out what it's doing, and so on.
Okay. So for a Linux binary or a program, is there something similar in a Linux binary, or for like a Mac? If you had a Mac, I know recently they talked about malware in Mac versions. Is there anything similar like that in that?
Oh yeah, so Linux binaries are typically ELF binaries.
Mm-hmm.
They have their own specific header. Mac binaries, I'll admit that's probably the least of where my knowledge is, but I've actually been looking at that a lot the last couple of days. They're the Mach O format, or some of them are at least the Mach O format, which have their own specific format. And what's great about malware analysis is once you understand the concepts of what you're looking for, all you need to do is modify your techniques a little bit for every single different file type that you go after, so that you know that, all right, so for Windows executables, I want to find out what libraries it loads, because those are going to tell me what what the capabilities of the malware are. If I see the networking libraries being loaded, then I know it has the capability to communicate over the network. And for Windows executables, those are typically located in the import address table, which you find in the PE header. Well, ELF binaries and Mac binaries and Android and everything else, they have their own. They have similar concepts for where that information is stored within the executable, and so once you figure out what you want to find, all you have to do is figure out where that is, and extrapolate upon that information to figure out what the malware is doing.
So I can understand how if you get an attachment, you double click it, boom, you could get infected. Can you walk through the life cycle of web-based malware, say in a like an advertisement? How does that actually infect my computer by just surfing,
Sure.
to a web page?
Yeah, so this actually happens a lot, especially with like what you just said, malicious ads. Uh, now, I'm not entirely sure as to how the bad guys get hold of the malicious ads. Typically, they either um, hack into somebody's account in a web-based ad company, or they will actually just buy an ad, a malicious ad under a fake name or something like that. But somehow, um, under a malicious ad, the bad guys will put some code that essentially will redirect them to their own malicious site. So what happens is, as a user, you go to some website, and an ad pops up. You happen to be the unlucky one who gets the malicious ad, and then your browser behind the scenes, unbeknownst to you, gets redirected to their malicious site. When you go to their malicious site, they typically have a web attack toolkit on there, and there are probably 100 different types of web attack toolkits out there. And what they do is it uses JavaScript to essentially analyze your browser to figure out what browser you're using, what operating system you're using. Do you have Java installed? Do you have Adobe installed, and things like that? And then it sends back attacks which are likely to work. So if I'm running, Windows 7 with Internet Explorer 9, and I have some old version of Java installed, when I hit the malicious ad and get redirected to their attack site, it's going to send back, a couple different payloads of some Internet Explorer vulnerabilities, probably some Java vulnerabilities, maybe a Silverlight vulnerability, and hope that one of those works. At least one of those works. Oftentimes, if one of them works, a number of them are going to work. And the exploit code that gets downloaded and run on your system typically will go out and it'll download another binary. And this binary is usually called the first stage binary, or a dropper or a downloader. And its purpose is essentially to get on your system and download more malware.
Okay.
So once that first stage gets on there, your computer has been compromised. The first stage will sometimes just delete itself after it runs and downloads the next set of malware. Sometimes it stays on there and kind of goes into sleep mode, where it just waits for a day or two, and then makes sure that the malware it downloaded is still there. If it's not, it goes and re-downloads something else. And then that second stage malware that the dropper downloads could be anything. It could be a backdoor. It could be a Bitcoin miner. It could be ransomware. It could be all three of those. I've seen instances where the user gets infected from going to one website, and we find like 3 or 4 different types of malware on their system, all doing different things.
So the first stage is like a shim that may run something as simple as wget to pull down a new binary. Is it something like that, or is it going to be something really complex?
I've seen both. I've seen it very simple, where I've actually seen downloaders which will use the curl libraries to download malware. All it is just basically a curl command wrapped in a Windows executable. And then I've also seen ones that are very complicated, have rootkit capabilities, will sit on the system and they'll go into sleep mode. I mean, I've even seen some that will go to sleep for like 60 days. And then it'll wait 60 days to wake up, and if it finds that the malware that it downloaded is no longer there, it goes out and downloads the malware again.
Now I've heard where some malware infections, where if you get infected a second time, the new malware will actually clean off the old malware and then infect you with the new stuff. Is this something that you're seeing more and more of on a regular basis?
So are you talking about, like an upgraded version getting on there? Or are you talking about, like malware authors like removing competitors' malware?
Yeah, that's what I heard, that competitor malware will end up on somebody, removing a competitor's malware.
Um, I personally haven't seen it, or actually, let me rephrase that. I haven't seen it in a long time, but yeah, I know of instances where that's happened, where malware will get on, and typically what they're doing is they look for other common types of malware
Mm-hmm.
that they know are, I guess, the competitors to themselves to remove. So it definitely does happen. I mean, malware is a means to a business right now. It's a business model.
Sure.
We're no longer in the day and age where people are just hacking for fun or for notoriety. They want your systems to do something. They're gonna rent the time on your systems. They're gonna use it to mine bitcoins. They're gonna use it to encrypt all your files and make you pay to get them back, and so on. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's their business, and so like any business person, they want to make sure they're the only ones utilizing your computer.
Okay. So I'm going to go back to that 2008 OWASP talk, because sadly I did not find the one from DerbyCon in time. It's been a pretty hectic week for me. So you mentioned sand nets in that
Mhm.
talk. Do you still use sand nets, or you just use straight up sandboxes for your analysis?
Oh no, absolutely. I still use sand nets all the time. So sandboxes are computers that you run malware on. And if you're doing it, in my opinion, if you're doing it correctly, the sandbox is isolated, which means that it's not on the internet, which means that when you run your malware, there's no way for it to connect out. So it can't go and notify the bad guys, where you are, but then you also can't see what it's doing network wise. If it goes out and tries to download additional malware, but you're running it on a system with no network connectivity, you're not going to be able to see what it does without opening it up into something like IDA Pro.
Mm-hmm.
What a SANDNet does is it creates a virtual internet for for the malware to play in, and if you do it correctly, if you set it up correctly, the malware will excuse me the malware won't know that it's not on the actual internet, because your SANDNet will be replying to it with everything that it tries to do. So if it tries to do a DNS lookup for like google.com, your SANDNet is going to reply that, hey, here's the IP address for google.com, or let's say badguy.ru, it tries
Mm-hmm.
to do a DNS lookup for, it'll reply back, here's the IP address for badguy.ru, and when it tries to connect to that IP address on port 80 to download additional malware, your SANDNet will intercept that request and forward it to its own web server to capture what it's doing. You're still limited in what you can do. I mean, you're still not totally connected to the internet. I'm a really firm believer that if you're doing malware analysis, while there are times that you should allow malware to get out to the internet, those are rare and few and far between. And so the more you can isolate the malware while still making it think that it's on the internet, the better it's going to be for everybody in the long run.
Sure. You have to keep control of it. If you allow it to get out, then it's going to maybe do things that are not expected, and then you've lost the battle, and you'd
Absolutely.
have to start over. So you're inside a SANDNet, which is not supposed to have internet connectivity. How do you know what malware is going to do? I mean, you must have something that says, okay, oh, okay, I see it just went out or tried to go out to badguy.ru. Are you using tools like, I don't know, protocol analyzers, TCP dump, those kinds of things?
Yeah. So the way that my setup is, for the most part, I use VirtualBox for the most part,
Okay.
and I'll
Oh,
have
wow.
like a Windows 7 VirtualBox VM, which is what I run the malware in.
Mm-hmm.
Then I'll have another VirtualBox instance running. Usually I use Remnux, which is a Linux distribution that was created by Lenny Zeltzer.
Okay.
It's a Linux distribution that's solely for malware analysis. Um, and so what I do is I have these two systems up and running, and the Linux box, or I'm sorry, the Linux VM is set up to be the DNS server and default gateway for my Windows box.
Mm-hmm.
So any network traffic that the malware, or actually any traffic from the Windows VM, is going to be sent to my Linux VM. And so on my Linux VM, and they're both in host-only networking mode, so they can only talk to each other. Then on my Linux VM, I will run TCP dump to capture all the traffic going back and forth. And then I'll also run a tool set called inetsim. And what inetsim is just a bunch of Perl scripts that simulate different network services. So you run inetsim and it's going to do DNS for you. It'll create a fake web server. It'll create a fake MySQL server, a fake SMTP server. I think it'll also do SMB, so it'll simulate Microsoft Communications going back and forth. And so anything, or for the most part, any protocol that the malware tries to communicate on, inetsim will intercept and it will respond to it. So it'll at least get some conversation going. So I can, and then it logs everything. So I can look into the inetsim logs to see, hey, it went to this web server and this is what it tried to download. Or if it tries to go to some protocol that inetsim doesn't have a listener for, inetsim will actually grab that and send it to like this dummy listener,
Mm-hmm.
so that at least there are packets going across, and then I can take my TCP dump capture, load it into something like Wireshark, and analyze it to see if I can figure out what's going on. And then go from there. If it's just a web server on some weird port, then I'll modify inetsim to listen to a web server on that port. Or if it's some other weird protocol that I identify, maybe I write something on my own to talk back and forth, or somebody else has already done it for me.
Okay, that's pretty cool. So it's kind of interesting. A couple weeks prior to our active defense, we also did a podcast on TCP dump. I don't think we even mentioned anything about malware analyzing of using like TCP dump or Wireshark or anything like that. So that's a great way of doing of using a TCP dump. So
Now, does the malware, in some instances, detect that it's being analyzed, or does it only run like one time, and if something goes wrong, it just deletes itself? Have you seen any of that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And there are a number of ways that it does that. So in some of the ways that I've seen, so you're actually kind of talking about two different things. If the malware detects that if it deletes itself, if it doesn't get the response back that it wants, that's the great thing about running it in a VM. All I have to do is reset my snapshot in the VM, and it's back to the original format. The malware gets loaded back on there, and it's like it's running for the first time again.
Nice.
But I actually have seen there is malware that will go out and it will do things like DNS lookups for well-known sites like Google.com or Microsoft.com, sites that it knows what the IP addresses are supposed to be.
mm-hmm.
And if it doesn't get those IP addresses back, then it knows that something funky is going on. It's either in a VM, or it's being analyzed, or it's in some network where it can't get out to the internet, and so it just kind of kills itself and cuts loose at that point.
Huh. Well, that's interesting. So they are getting smarter with, instead of going, oh yeah, I can see IDA on this box, or I can see MASTIFF on this box, I'm going to delete myself. It'll be like, well, let's be sneaky. Let's do a DNS lookup, or let's see if we even have internet access and kill ourselves. That's that. So
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go on.
no, I just find it interesting how they've had to do that kind of esoteric thing. What made them think to use DNS in the first place to decide whether or not they were being analyzed.
It's just something I think that the bad guys just kind of evolved, just as as defenders we do as well. They saw how people were analyzing their malware, the way that their setups were, and realized, hey, all we have to do is do a DNS lookup for this site, and if it doesn't come back as what we expect it to be, then we know that we're in a sand net. I mean, I've even seen some that will go to websites like whatismyip.com or something similar, and it'll compare the IP address that comes back with a subset of known IP addresses for antivirus companies or for security companies. And if it sees that it's in one of those address ranges, then it definitely knows that it's being analyzed, and it just kind of kills itself then.
Yeah, but you can alter that traffic coming back, right?
Oh, absolutely, and that's the great thing about using something like inetsim. They're just all Perl scripts, and all you
Mm-hmm.
have to do is go in and modify things. I mean, inetsim is pretty flexible, where you can actually define specific IP addresses for specific DNS requests. And the great thing about inetsim, and I keep harping on inetsim, but that's because it's what I use. That's what I'm most familiar with. But the great thing about it is, even if it's trying to go to directly to some other IP address that the Linux VM that you're running it on uh, doesn't own, it will still intercept that request and respond to it as that IP address. So the malware thinks that it's talking with this IP address in China or whatever hard-coded IP address it has, when it's really still talking to my virtual machine.
Yeah, that's cool. That's really cool. Tyler, one thing I'd like to take away from this dialogue is, being a security practitioner, what are the things that I should know about malware to help prevent an infection, infiltration, what have you?
Oh wow. Well, I think you know in my experience from responding to organizations that have gotten a malware compromise, the biggest things that I can say are, make sure you have defense in depth in place. Uh, Make sure you have antivirus on your mail servers that are scanning attachments. If you can afford it, get a device that analyzes attachments in their own sandboxes the way that something like a FireEye device would use or would perform. um, People kind of give or talk bad about antivirus software, and I mean for good reason. I mean, the antivirus definitely needs to change, but I think what most organizations don't realize is that a lot of antiviruses actually have changed within the last couple of years, and they've moved away from the signature based stuff, which really doesn't work,
Mm-hmm.
to doing more heuristics, a more heuristics based approach. And while it is absolutely not perfect, um, most organizations just turn off that heuristic stuff to begin with. And a lot of malware that I've seen would have been caught by the heuristics if they were turned on. And then there are simple things that you can do. Lock down your machines. Don't let executables run from the user's temp directory. There's absolutely no reason why an application should be running out of there, and that's where most malware get dumped, and that's where they run from. Um, in fact, I think it's on the malware. I want to say it's the Malwarebytes website. They've got a really good article on how to detect and recover from the crypto wall uh, ransomware. And one of the recommendations that they give, and they actually give a link out to a tool that will do this for you, is how to create a local policy, or you can even do this in group policy to prevent things like that from happening. To push out a policy to all your clients to prevent executables from running in a user's temp directory, and that's going to prevent a lot of malware from running, in my opinion at least.